You are a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, slay the ego, raise the humanity. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone. Hey, LinkedIn, YouTube. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm in Pacific Standard Time, so it's afternoon where I am. I hope you are doing well and you're hearing my voice and you're being received with light and love. So I'm coming to you on a day. I usually do this on Wednesdays, but life is not linear. It's lunar, like the moon. There's different phases. And so I wanted to get this live in because we were talking about High on the Hog. This episode is episode 3. And if you have not watched it yet, or if you have watched it, let me know. What do you think? Go ahead and drop in the comments. But we're going to go ahead and get this live started. So if you're joining us for the first time in the High Vibe Zone, welcome. I'm your host, Sharice Fonts. And if this is your second, third, fourth, fifth time, hello again. Drop in the comments where you're coming from, what you're grateful for. And per usual, we are going to be doing the encouraging card of the day. So for those that are on the West Coast, you're in the afternoon time with me. And for those of y'all that are in the East Coast, is evening time for you. So, and for those of you that are across the pond, you might be asleep. I'm actually not very good at time zones. There's this tool called Time Is. I think it's time.is or something like that. I used to use it a lot when I was an executive assistant for keeping track of multiple time zones, but it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to say is encouragement can be used at any time of the day. So as I shuffle these cards, we'll see what we get. We're going to talk about it for a little bit and then jump into High on the Hog. And this episode is episode 3 about founding chefs, which blew my mind. So like I said, you'll never look at mac and cheese again. And I think I got a little bit, for those who haven't watched it, I'll just give you a little secret to really amazing mac and cheese. All right, let's pull this card. What do we have? This is amazing. Be awesome today. Okay, so be awesome today. What is that? Read that in. I think 3 things come up for me when I hear be awesome today. One is a beautiful affirmation to oneself. So standing in the mirror, reminding yourself, be awesome today. And the second thing that comes to my mind is the word awesome in itself and the word awe. And just to think about what that means, be in awe of yourself, of myself, that we are here. And there's so much abundance and prosperity around us and all of these amazing blessings and lessons that are being taught on a continuous basis. And so to be in constant state of awe reminds me of my little human when we go on walks and he just sees leaves and he's in awe. So that's the other thing that I think about when I hear and see the word awesome. And the third thing is being present in your awesomeness and welcoming that. And just, every once in a while, just feel like I'm awesome. Yes, I'm awesome. I am here. It doesn't matter if you're not doing everything right. You don't have to. You are awesome just the way that you are. I am awesome just the way that I am. And you know what? To be truthful, somebody thinks you're awesome. So I don't know who that person is, but it doesn't matter. As long as you got one awesome human that thinks you're awesome. That's good. So for today, and if I pulled this card tomorrow, it would be for that day. So be present in your awesomeness. Look at yourself in the mirror. Put those shoulders up and say, I am awesome. And yes, you are. Oh man, LinkedIn user. I don't know why it does that, but I know you have a name, but thank you. Grateful for the opportunity to join you and support from friends this week. That's amazing. Yes, grateful that you are here and that you had support of friends. There is this thing that my dad would say. He's from the South, and he would say, let me clarify, because I've referenced my dad. I have two dads. So let me put it that way. I have two dads, and one of my dad's from the South, and he referenced this thing. I remember he was like, it's this old Southern saying, walking down the street with a loaf of bread in your hand crying. And it's a Southern term. So if you find somebody that's from the South, they probably have seen this, an elder from the South. But what it essentially means is, we don't realize what we actually have. And if you're walking, it means you have your health. If you have some bread underneath your arm, you have something to eat, you have substance. And if you're crying, you are crying about something. You have something that's, happening around you, or some things are shifting. You have emotions, you're alive. And so I just thought it was a good thought. And, just this comment just reminded me of like support from friends from the week. It's like having someone there to be there and support you through whatever it is that you're going through is really key. So thank you so much for sharing your gratitude with me. Again, welcome to the High Vibe Zone. We're going to get into it with this High on the Hog conversation about our founding chefs. So let me walk you through. So we're kind of in part 3. So if you watched any of the other lives, I've done a live with Tony. Last week it was with Maria, and I'm here solo. Next week I have an amazing special guest, and we are going to wrap up the entire Netflix docuseries High on the Hog. So don't miss that at all. So we've been talking about this docuseries of how African cuisine has really shaped the world of American food and like what all of that means. And then it's such a beautiful docuseries that talks about the history of Africa, the history of Black people and America, and how some of these stories are just so empowering, and some of them honestly are hard to listen to. But I love to choose which vibration I'm at. And so I always look at how much power has come before me and where I'm at right now. And so it's a beautiful representation of the African and Black in America history. This is not history you're gonna get in a history book, y'all. So if you do not have Netflix, let me know. Maybe you could borrow mine, but you definitely want to check out High on the Hog. It says it's on there for a limited time, so I don't know when it's going to come off of there, but we went through the roots. We went ahead and talked about rice, the rice kingdom. That was really, really big, realizing that rice was one of the main reasons why slaves, along with other reasons, were brought to America in the Carolinas. You could see how much land was moved to create rice. And then that rice is actually one of those things that bring us culturally together. It's in all kinds of cultures. So rice plate, you never look at rice the same, just like you're not about to look at mac and cheese the same again. So there's that one. And so now we're going to be talking about founding chefs. And for me, there was a lot of conversations. I mean, this series starts off, I'm going to give you my highlights and things that stood out for me and just talk about it a little bit without giving the entire thing away. But 2 presidents' names came up when you think of the founding fathers, and then they went ahead and did founding chefs. So these 2 chefs, Hemings and, let me get my notes real quick, y'all. I don't have a photographic memory, but the 2 chefs that were Hemings, James Hemings, and Hercules. So they were slaves to George Washington. So George Washington had Hercules as his slave, and then they were enslaved to him. And Thomas Jefferson had James Hemings. So what was really interesting about this, there was so many things that stood out. I'm trying to like recall as I look at my notes. So George Washington actually was able to keep Hercules enslaved for a while. And Hercules was such a great chef that he actually made a lot of money selling leftovers that he would make for George Washington. So that just puts in perspective this amazing chef. Like, can you imagine, making money off of leftovers that were that good? And so he was based in Pennsylvania. So at that time, there was a law that if any enslaved were on Pennsylvania land for longer than 6 months, they were free. So what George Washington would do is he would take all of his enslaved and go to Mount Vernon and then bring them back, and the clock would start over again. And so that was a really interesting thing that stood out, and just kind of that loophole and how George Washington was really adamant about keeping the enslaved in his vicinity. And then you also have Thomas Jefferson. And so Thomas Jefferson, his chef was James Hemings. And at an early age, James would travel with Thomas Jefferson to France, and that's where he learned how to cook. So I want to talk a little bit about macaroni and cheese, because apparently Thomas Jefferson loved mac and cheese, and it was actually called macaroni pie. And I'm going to give y'all a little cooking tip right here, because it's in the docuseries. So it's not my exclusive tip, but the way you want to cook mac and cheese or macaroni and pie is when you boil the noodles, you add milk or any kind of dairy-free option and water. And so usually when I've cooked it, I've always just put salt and water. But now moving forward, I'm going to be putting a little bit of both in there. And it was cooked in half water, half milk. And so that was actually Jefferson's favorite dish. And so again, Hemings came and was really trained in France, and Jefferson would keep him as one of his favorite chefs. And one of the ways that Hemings, I wonder if I have this right. Actually, I'm going to move on to something else. There was something, yes. So one of the way that Hemings got his freedom was to train his younger brother. And so there was just this, it was really interesting to hear what happened to Hemings. I think they talked about his death. He was in New York for a while after he became free. He did some cooking and some things there, and they're not sure. They just found out that he had passed away. Not sure if it was suicide or it was accidental. He had drunk himself. But that was really hard on Jefferson. Apparently, he was one of his favorites. And Jefferson also was classified as a foodie. So it was like just kind of listening to all this history. And when I was in school learning about the founding fathers, none of this stuff ever came out that they were about food. It didn't come out about owning slaves. I didn't really, maybe didn't pay attention to that part in history class, but that wasn't the part that I was aware of, and the loopholes that were used there. But outside of that, there was just so much knowledge and cuisine that was created based off these founding chefs. And so as we start to see it shift, and through the 1800s, where a lot of Black people were one of the first caterers, they were the first starting catering businesses in America. And that was really interesting to hear, because again, news to me that was something that was actually going on in the 1800s. And so they found a bunch of documents. There was also a town called Sandy Grounds that is still around today, where a lot of Black people settled. And it was a fascinating thing to, again, watch this episode and realize that there was so much food that came out of what something that we don't really like to talk about too much is the slavery history, the enslaved, but a lot of food was brought out from that. And I just find that to be a really beautiful legacy. Another thing that I thought was really interesting, Robert Bogle was the father of catering. And so that he started it, I think, 100 years before 18, the 1900s. So he started catering 100 years before that. And I think that's really cool. So, starting a catering business back then had to have been challenging, but the food and the cuisine, again, looking at the lineage, had so much knowledge. And so for me, when I watched this episode of High on the Hog, I can't help but think of not only the resilience of my people, but the resilience of humanity, as there's been so many different things that have happened, but through food, not only connects us, but our history and our lineage. So I really encourage you, again, learn about this stuff because it's not taught in history books. And there are some dark points. And there was a line that someone said is sometimes Black history can be so dark, but there is so much beauty between the lines. And I believe that is so true. There's two paths that we can take with our history. And I love, again, how High on the Hog has really balanced out those paths with that duality between light and dark. And for me, I find it very encouraging and very grounding and rooting to know about the history. So again, mac and cheese was Jefferson's favorite. It was called macaroni pie. And if you want to make it right, you want to do half water, half milk. And it goes through the whole kind of recipe in the episode. So definitely watch that. The last thing I'll say about this episode, because I want to keep this live a bit short, is as you're watching, you might hear things that are upsetting or interesting to you, and just sit with them. Like, I've watched it a few times, and again, I walk away. This is just my experience. I walk away just feeling even more empowered and knowing that there's nothing that I can't do. I mean, to think about back then, which I don't know if I would even choose. Like, if you're like, could you live here in this time and space, or would you want to live back then? I'd be like, look, just keep me here. I don't know if I would be able to endure or want to be around what my ancestors, what people before me came and had to deal with. So when I think about that, and then everything that I now know around rice and community and food and the history, it's extremely empowering, but not in a way of prideful empowering. I think that's the trick, is to never let the ego get out of place. For me, it's a humbling empowering that if it can be done, if it was done before, it could be done again. And so, again, I just really encourage you to watch this episode of High on the Hog. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but like I said, it really stems from the founding fathers of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and those chefs, Hemmings and Hercules. And then it goes into a little bit more about talking about different types of foods. It has this whole thing on oyster shucking, which is so phenomenal. There's this guy in New York. I think it's New York. Well, I can't remember the part of New York, but he's called the Bad Mother Shucker. And like, he's like getting people to eat oysters because there was a huge history around oysters and oyster shucking in the Black community, which I had no idea. I personally like oysters, but he's saying that, some Black people have not eaten oysters. And it's a really key part in history. And so it talks about that, which I think is really cool. I'll wrap up with this. I'm doing this series because there's a lot of my history that was not taught to me. And when I found things that were docuseries and things like in our grandmother's gardens, listening to that documentary, Amendment, which I think I'll do a whole thing on later on. I haven't finished it yet, but High on the Hog really resonated with me. And I'm like, if we could look at this from both sides. Yes, there is a lot of pain and hurt that has happened. But if we look at what has come out of that, what has transcended past that, I am very confident that we would be able to move forward, not as a silo, but together. And so I really appreciate going through those ebbs and flows and digging into the feelings and the vibrations that it brings up for me and working on healing if there is some that's needed. So I'm doing this to highlight and showcase High on the Hog. I am not being paid to do this. It's just something that really resonated with me and something that I wanted to bring into the high vibe zone because it is high vibe content. It is raising our higher consciousness. So this is bringing awareness to you. I encourage you to go check out High on the Hog. Start with episode 1, Roots, then move on to Rice Kingdom, then hit up this episode that I'm talking about, which is Founding Chefs. And next week, with my super special guest, we are going to be talking about freedom. And that will wrap up the conversation about High on the Hog here in the High Vibe Zone. And again, the history is amazing. The detail to history is amazing. And the transcendence and the empowerment and inspiration that comes from something like this is equally amazing. So a little short snippet. Again, mac and cheese, I will never look at it the same. In fact, they have somebody in the docuseries that is a descendant from Hemmings, who brought mac and cheese here. He also brought, so he studied in France. So I'm not saying it originated with him, but in regards to America, he brought French fries, ice cream, and mac and cheese. So there's your history lesson for today. Go watch High on the Hog. Let me know what you think. And until we see each other again, I just want to send you a blessing of light, love, and gratitude. Thank you so much for being with me in the High Vibe Zone. I'm going to go hit it out with the intro, outro duo. And I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here with me. Talk to you soon. Bye. You are a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, slay the ego, raise the humanity. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone.